comes out and says, I don't think she was doing it on purpose. The coach says that.
Stephanie White watched it happen, then said she didn't. That is not a complicated story to follow, and it is not one that requires any particular sports expertise to evaluate. The broadcast camera was on her face the entire time. Her eyes were tracking the play from the moment Carrington left her feet through the moment Cunningham hit the floor. There was no clipboard blocking her view. There was no assistant coach conversation pulling her attention sideways. She was watching professional basketball happen directly in front of her own bench, which is precisely what head coaches are supposed to be doing during live play. And then, 3 days later, standing at a different podium in front of a different set of cameras with a significantly different tone, she told the world she went straight from the bench to a press conference and only understood how bad the play actually was once she watched it on replay afterward. Right now, Patrick Bet-David has already pulled up the footage and said publicly what most people were already thinking privately. Analysts are running the sideline angle next to the press conference quote and letting the comparison speak for itself. Fans who were already frustrated about the original foul response are watching the revised story fall apart in real time with each new frame that gets examined. The full picture of what Stephanie White saw, what she said, what she changed, and what it means for every player sitting in that Indiana Fever locker room is what we are breaking down completely right now. And the answer to why her story changed when it did is going to tell you everything about where the real loyalty in this situation actually lived. There is a specific reason the sideline footage became the most important piece of evidence in this entire story, and it has nothing to do with the foul itself.
Go all the way to the front. This is how she plays. Look,
damn, girl.
She's obviously very sweet. She doesn't at all have any negative intent. Yeah, at all. She doesn't hit hard, and she plays very clean basketball.
Another white privilege.
And watch what she does to the eyes. You see?
Everyone who watched the Cunningham play already knew what it looked like. The flagrant 2 call, the ejection, the replay from multiple angles, all of that was processed and distributed across every sports platform within hours of the game ending. The debate about whether the contact was intentional was already running at full volume before most people had gone to sleep that night. None of that required the sideline footage to develop into a national conversation. What the sideline footage added was something different. It added a witness, a specific, named, professionally relevant witness whose subsequent public statements about what she did or did not observe in real time became directly contradicted by what the camera captured her doing during the exact moment in question. Watch that footage carefully. Stephanie White is standing in the coaching box in the standard position a head coach occupies during live play. Her head is not down. She is not consulting a clipboard or reviewing a substitution rotation with an assistant.
By them, I will always stand by them.
Amen.
Everybody else can go to hell.
Wait a minute.
Kindness.
She is not turned toward the bench managing a player coming off the floor. She is facing the court with her eyes on the action, which is exactly where a head coach's attention belongs during a fast break possession that is developing in front of her own bench. When Carrington makes contact with Cunningham and Cunningham goes down, White's face registers what every other face in that arena registered, the immediate recognition that something significant just happened on the floor. Her eyes do not move away from the play. They stay locked on the sequence from beginning to end. That specific visual detail is what made her post-game press conference response so striking to anyone who had watched the sideline angle before sitting down to hear her comments. Because the confidence she brought to those comments, the detailed, specific, unhesitating characterization of Carrington's intent and competitive style did not sound like someone who had processed a play secondhand through descriptions from assistant coaches on a headset.
Everybody else is trying to divide our locker room. No, not having your players back will do quite the adequate job at doing that.
It sounded like someone who had watched the play happen with her own eyes and formed a clear, immediate opinion about what she saw. She said Carrington plays her heart out every single night. She said nobody is walking in for an easy layup against her. She said she personally did not oppose the hard foul. She said she didn't think Carrington intentionally went for the neck. Every one of those statements was delivered with the kind of direct, composed confidence that comes from being certain about what you observed, not from receiving secondhand information in a hallway on the way to a press conference room. The coaching relationship with Carrington is not a minor footnote in understanding why that response landed the way it did. 2 full seasons working together in Connecticut builds a real dynamic. You know how a player competes. You know their physical style, their defensive instincts, their emotional approach to contact situations. When White said Carrington plays her heart out and nobody walks in for a layup, that read as someone speaking from genuine personal knowledge of how that specific player moves on a basketball court. Not as a coach offering a generic defense of a player she barely knows from the opposing roster.
After the DiJonai Carrington clothesline from hell incident the other day, in which she came out and said, oh, DiJonai's she's not a dirty player. She just plays real hard. Blah, 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 blah. I mean, look, she turns into the Charlie Brown teacher pretty quickly with a lot of people. At least with me, she does. The moment I realize she's going to do it again and not back her own player, yeah, I'm out. I got to tell you, one of the most obvious traits of a terrible leader, not taking any responsibility.
That personal knowledge is precisely why the immediate post-game defense landed so hard with people watching. It was not the detached commentary of a neutral observer. It was someone vouching for a player they know personally, in a moment when the player they actually coach had just been taken down by a flagrant 2 on national television. The personal connection explained the instinct. It did not excuse the outcome of following it. When reporters gathered around Stephanie White after the game, the question about the Carrington foul was coming regardless of what else happened that night. The sequence of events was too visible, too dramatic, and too immediately contentious for any post-game press availability to sidestep it entirely. Cunningham had been down on the floor. Trainers had checked on her courtside. Teammates from both sides had needed to physically separate the 2 players in the aftermath. The officials had reviewed the play and upgraded it to the most serious foul category in the rulebook. Carrington had been ejected before the arena had fully processed what it just witnessed. Whatever else Stephanie White wanted to talk about in that press conference, the foul was the first topic.
She has to be fired immediately. Indiana Fever head coach Stephanie White walked past her own player Sophie Cunningham to check on DiJonai Carrington after the hard foul.
Her response when it came was not tentative. She did not lead with uncertainty about what she had or hadn't seen clearly from the sideline. She did not hedge by saying she would need to look at the replay before forming a firm opinion. She went directly into a characterization of Carrington's competitive style and a defense of the physicality behind the play. The language she used was specific and personal. This is how DJ plays. She competes at full speed every night. Nobody is getting a free layup when she is on the floor guarding them. She said she did not oppose the hard foul and added that she did not believe Carrington had intentionally gone for the neck. That last part is the piece that immediately drew the sharpest reaction from anyone watching with the replay still fresh in their mind. A flagrant 2 in the WNBA requires the officiating crew to determine that the contact was not only excessive, but deliberate enough in its execution to warrant immediate ejection rather than a standard foul. The wind-up, the impact, and the follow-through language in the official ruling is specifically designed to communicate that the play crossed from aggressive into intentional. When the officiating crew uses that language, they are going on record to say that what happened was not an accident that resulted from 2 players fighting for position at high speed. It was deliberate contact that the rules categorize separately from everything else that happens in a physical basketball game.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was a hard foul. I don't think that
DiJonai intentionally came out to get her across the neck like she did, but it did happen, and I thought it was the right call. But, you know, one of the things about Nay is that she's going to play her butt off, man. She's going to compete. Nobody's going to go walking in for a layup. And so I don't oppose the hard foul, but I also don't think that she intentionally went for the neck.
For a head coach to stand at a podium immediately after that ruling and say she personally did not believe the contact was intentional is to directly contradict the official determination of the officials who reviewed the play from multiple angles before arriving at the Flagrant 2 designation. That is not a neutral observation. It is a coach publicly inserting herself into an officiating decision with a personal characterization that contradicts the league's own conclusion about what happened on the floor. Analysts noticed immediately. The response across sports media was not slow to develop. The question that kept surfacing in commentary across every platform was variations of the same core challenge. How does a flagrant 2 that visibly takes a player down get described by that player's own head coach as something she personally does not oppose? The answer most people landed on pointed directly at the personal history between White and Carrington, because the basketball logic alone did not produce a coherent explanation for the response she gave.
I can't believe that Stephanie White kind of stood up for Carrington. You would never see Shell Reeve, Becky Hammond doing this. You may think something, but you sit in a press conference and say that in front of your team? You don't do that. That's how you lose the team. The team will go against you. What? I'm blown away by that. You can think, oh, I used to coach her, talk to her on the side, whatever, but you don't go on national news and basically put down your own team.
What made the reaction even sharper was the timing. Cunningham had not yet left the trainer's evaluation area when White was already at the podium defending the player who had just been ejected for hitting her. The optics of that sequence, coach defends opposing player while her own player is still being checked by medical staff, added a visual dimension to the loyalty question that the words alone would not have fully captured. That image, paired with the post-game comments, is what set the fuse for everything that followed over the next 72 hours. When the backlash did not fade the way White might have expected it to, the calculus around her original comments changed. Sports controversies follow a predictable arc in most cases. The initial reaction is loud and immediate. Commentary piles up for 24 to 48 hours. Then a new story arrives and the previous cycle gets displaced before it fully resolves. That standard arc did not apply here because the sideline footage kept recirculating alongside the post-game comments, and the combination refused to let the story breathe its way out of the news cycle. Every time someone new encountered the clip, they watched it, read the comments, found the press conference response, and the outrage refreshed itself with a new audience attached to it. By the time White returned to the podium 3 days later, the volume of criticism had reached a level that made staying with the original framing untenable. Something needed to shift, and what shifted was the foundational element of the entire story. Her account of what she actually witnessed during the play. The new version arrived with a significantly different tone than the original. Gone was the confident, direct characterization of Carrington's competitive nature and deliberate intent.
And why is Fever coach Stephanie White defending DiJonai Carrington over her own player? That is absolutely bizarre considering you can watch the replay of that and it was absolutely unacceptable what happened to Cunningham. Both Sophie Cunningham and Caitlin Collins are wonderful role models for young children, and they play the game exceptionally well. Sophie Cunningham said that the hit by DiJonai Carrington was intentional, but Sophie Cunningham's coach sided with Carrington. Carrington is a Chicago Sky Guard that was once coached by White. I just can't understand why the WNBA is not doing more to protect their players. When Stephanie White was interviewed, she said she doesn't oppose the foul, but she definitely doesn't think it was intentional. that Carrington plays her butt off. That's a pretty generous interpretation of what happened to Sophie Cunningham.
In its place came an explanation built around logistics and timing. She had gone straight from the bench to the scheduled press conference, she said. There was no moment between the final buzzer and the first reporter question where she had been able to review the replay. She had commented on the play without the benefit of slow motion from 6 different angles, and once she actually watched it repeatedly in the aftermath, she understood how egregious it looked. She said she takes it personally when anyone suggests she does not have her players' backs. She said she rides with all of them unconditionally and always has. On its face, this is a version of events that could happen to any coach in a fast-moving post-game environment. Press conferences get scheduled. Replays are not always available in real time on a sideline monitor. Coaches comment on plays they may have seen imperfectly from a difficult angle in a loud arena. All of that is plausible in the abstract. The problem is that none of it matches what the broadcast camera shows during the actual play. Her head does not move during the sequence. Her eyes do not shift to a monitor, an assistant, or a clipboard. She is facing the court with a direct sight line to the exact location where the contact occurs, and nothing in the camera angle suggests her view was obstructed or her attention divided at the moment the play developed.
In the last game, I didn't see the play in real time. I went straight to a press conference. I thought the play got called right. Thankfully, Sophie's okay. Was it egregious? Absolutely. When you have a chance to watch that over and over and over on replay, you can see that. I didn't have that in real time.
Were there any
I take personally any suggestions that I don't 100% always have my players back. I ride with them 10 toes down all the time. All the time.
Line footage shows a coach watching a play unfold from a position of clear visibility, reacting to it in real time, and then walking to a press conference where she commented on it with the confidence of someone who had seen it directly rather than someone who was reconstructing it from secondhand information. When people started placing that sideline footage directly next to the revised press conference explanation, the comparison generated its own viral moment, separate from the original foul controversy. Frame-by-frame breakdowns circulated across every platform with the same basic message. Watch her eyes, then listen to what she said 3 days later, and decide for yourself whether those two things belong to the same timeline. The audience that received that comparison reached a conclusion with remarkable consistency. The revised story did not hold up against the visual record of what was captured during the game. Patrick Bet David was among the most direct in naming what most people were concluding without saying explicitly. He pulled up the footage, noted that White's eyes were clearly tracking the play as it happened, and stated plainly that the explanation she offered 3 days later did not match what the cameras recorded her doing in real time. That kind of direct, named assessment from a high-profile commentator with a large audience gave the skepticism a public anchor that turned a fan-level conversation into a media-level story in its own right.
Were there any
I take personally any suggestions that I don't 100% always have my players back. I ride with them 10 toes down all the time. All the time. They know that. It's a shame that we can't have an opportunity to talk about what great basketball they're playing. Because they are f***ing playing. The reality is, with me, I will always lead with love. I will always lead with grace. I will always lead with humility. And I will always lead with integrity. Doesn't mean I'll always get it right. I'm also human. The hate, the fear-mongering, the divisiveness, the stuff that's trying to hijack our league will not win.
Explanation did not close the controversy. It opened a second one. Now, the story was not just about a coach defending the wrong player after a dangerous foul. It was about a coach whose revised account of her own direct experience appeared to contradict broadcast footage that millions of people could watch themselves with no specialized knowledge required to evaluate what it showed. The moment in this entire saga that generated the most visceral reaction online was not the foul, It was not the initial post-game defense. It was not even the revised story about not seeing the play in real time. It was the speech.
And then she put both hands up right after. But that's... DiJonai's not doing things half speed, right?
No.
Like, she's swinging hard and coming back.
Standing at that same podium during the second round of press availability, Stephanie White raised her voice and delivered what was clearly intended as a definitive statement about her identity as a head coach and her commitment to the people she leads. She said she stands by her players no matter what. She said she rides with them 10 toes down all the time, every single time, without exception. She said she leads with love, with grace, with humility, and with integrity. She said she takes it personally, deeply personally, when anyone outside that locker room suggests otherwise. She said the hate and the fear-mongering and the divisiveness trying to hijack the league would not win. She closed with the line that landed the hardest across social media. Everybody else can go to hell. It was passionate. It was loud. It was delivered with the emotional intensity of someone who had been sitting with 3 days of criticism and had reached the limit of her patience with it. And it would have landed entirely differently if it had not contained a contradiction that the audience had been thinking about for 3 straight days before she said any of it. She stands by her players. She rides with them unconditionally. She will always have their backs, regardless of what anyone outside the locker room says about it. Which players exactly? Sophie Cunningham is her player. Sophie Cunningham wears the Indiana Fever jersey. Sophie Cunningham sits in the Indiana Fever locker room every day. Sophie Cunningham takes instructions from Stephanie White at practice and in film sessions and during timeouts in live games. When the Indiana Fever travel to away games, Sophie Cunningham is on that plane. When the coaching staff reviews tape, Sophie Cunningham is in that room. By every professional and organizational definition of the word, Sophie Cunningham is one of Stephanie White's players in exactly the same sense that any other name on that roster is. And Sophie Cunningham was the one who hit the floor.
Got a better view than some of the referees got. And then this is how she comes and cries on TV about the criticism she got. How dare people on social media call her out? Go for it.
The passionate speech about standing by your players, riding with them unconditionally, and taking it personally when people question your loyalty, landed in the context of a situation where the player who needed her coach to stand by her most immediately and most vocally was the one whose experience took 3 days and a mounting public pressure campaign to finally receive the acknowledgement it deserved. The player White did stand by immediately, loudly, and confidently before the arena had even finished clearing out was the one who caused the injury, not the one who absorbed it. That contradiction is not a subtle reading that requires looking for problems where none exist. It is the plain arithmetic of what happened in sequence. Carrington got the immediate, detailed, personal defense. Cunningham got the revised, carefully worded acknowledgement that arrived 72 hours later, only after the outside pressure made staying with the original position impossible. Calling that standing by all of your players equally is not a description that matches the timeline of events. What analysts who picked up on this dynamic pointed out is that the speech itself, emotional as it was, read more as a self-defense than as a genuine accounting for what had gone wrong. The language about hate and fear-mongering and things trying to hijack the league positioned White as a figure under siege from external forces, rather than as a coach examining an honest question about where her institutional loyalty had pointed in a moment of genuine organizational stress. When you respond to a specific, grounded criticism about a specific, documented sequence of events with language about divisiveness and outside noise trying to bring you down, the framing is doing work that the substance is not. It is converting a direct question about coaching judgment into a broader cultural conflict, where the critic is cast as the aggressor and the subject is positioned as the victim. That framing did not land well with the audience that had been watching the timeline develop. The booing from fans in the arena before the game where White gave that speech was not the sound of people who had been successfully convinced that the real problem was outside noise. It was the sound of people who had watched a specific sequence of events play out and formed a specific opinion about what it revealed. While the coaching staff was navigating its evolving public position, the player who actually absorbed the contact had already told her own version of events. Sophie Cunningham did not wait for a carefully worded statement. She did not hedge her language or leave interpretive room for audiences to fill in the blanks. In her own postgame comments, she said the foul was intentional. She described how it felt to absorb that kind of contact in a vulnerable position on a fast break, going up for a layup with no anticipation of what was coming from behind. She was direct about her belief that what happened was not an accident or an unfortunate product of two physical players fighting for position at speed. She said she did not believe it was incidental contact, and she said it in plain language without qualifiers. That put her on record with a version of events that directly contradicted what her own head coach had said from the same building on the same night. One player who got hurt saying the contact was intentional. One coach who watched the play from a few feet away saying she did not believe it was intentional. Both of those statements existing simultaneously in the public record about the same play creates an obvious problem that no amount of later revision can fully resolve, because both statements were made on the record and both remain available to anyone who wants to place them next to each other. The trust dynamic that this contradiction created is not complicated. When a player tells her version of what happened to her own body in a live basketball game, and her own coach simultaneously offers a different characterization of the same event that lands more favorably for the opposing player, the audience makes a decision about which account carries more authority. That decision is not usually difficult. The person who absorbed the contact has a specific, immediate, physical relationship with the event that no sideline observer can fully replicate. The player who got hit knows what the contact felt like. She knows the angle it came from. She knows whether it felt like an athletic contest for a ball or something else entirely. Fans trusted Cunningham's account. They trusted it not only because she was the one who experienced the contact directly, but because her account was consistent from the beginning, while the coach's account changed based on external pressure. A story that stays the same across multiple tellings carries a different credibility weight than a story that revises itself in response to mounting criticism. That asymmetry and consistency is part of what kept Cunningham's version at the center of how the public understood the incident throughout the entire controversy. The other dimension of this that deserves acknowledgement is the specific human experience of waiting for your own coach to validate what happened to you. Cunningham said the hit was intentional the same night it occurred. Her coach's acknowledgement that the play was egregious arrived 3 days later. Whatever the internal conversations were inside the Fever organization during those 72 hours, the public-facing timeline left Cunningham's account sitting without institutional support from her own sideline for the better part of a week. That is not an abstract organizational failure. That is a real experience for a real person who had just been on the floor after a flagrant 2 foul, watching the public conversation around it develop in a direction that her own coach's initial comments were actively feeding. Just as the debate around White's comments was reaching its most heated point, the story that everyone had been discussing acquired new evidence that nobody had asked for. 4 days after the Cunningham ejection, DiJonai Carrington was on the floor against the Golden State Valkyries. And within the span of a single game, 2 more players absorbed face area contact from Carrington that set the entire sports internet back into the same conversation it had just been trying to process. Cecilia Zandarini was guarding on the perimeter when Carrington's left hand swept across and made direct contact with her eye, while both arms were raised in what looked from a distance like a defensive contest. The right hand had gone toward the basketball in a movement with a defensible basketball explanation. The left hand's trajectory had no basketball explanation at all. Tiffany Hayes went up for a layup later in the same game, and Carrington's arm came down and caught her directly across the mouth in a play where the ball was not near either player's hands at the moment of contact. Neither incident drew a flagrant. Neither drew a technical at the moment of contact. Carrington did pick up a technical earlier in the same game for arguing with officials, which told its own story about the competitive temperature she was operating at before either face contact occurred. The timing of these incidents relative to the ongoing public conversation about Stephanie White's coaching judgment was not neutral. White's original defense, "She plays her heart out, nobody gets a free layup, I don't oppose the hard foul," was the specific framing that analysts and fans had been challenging for days. The argument being made against that framing was that it described a competitive physical style rather than a documented pattern of dangerous contact. The Valkyries game arrived and provided 2 more entries for the documented pattern column in a single night. Every analyst who had been skeptical of White's post-game comments now had additional footage to point to. Every fan who had been saying the Cunningham play was not an isolated incident now had same-week evidence supporting that read. And White's coaching judgment, specifically her instinct to immediately defend Carrington's style of play, rather than calling the Cunningham contact dangerous, now sat next to a game where the same player had generated 2 more face contact incidents against 2 different opponents, without drawing a flagrant call from officials who had full knowledge of what the previous week's play had looked like. The Valkyries game did not just add to the Carrington story. It retroactively complicated every element of White's defense. If the original response had been to call the Cunningham foul egregious on night 1, rather than 3 days later, the Valkyries game would still have been a problem for Carrington. But it would not have been a problem for White in the same way. Her credibility on the Carrington conduct question would have been intact because she would have been on record calling dangerous play dangerous when it first occurred. Instead, the Valkyries game arrived while her credibility on exactly that question was still actively contested, and it hardened the case being made against her judgment into something significantly more difficult to walk back than a single uncomfortable press conference. The most revealing development in the final chapter of this story was not something that came from outside the Fever organization, it came from inside it. Caitlin Clark publicly defended Stephanie White. That is not a small thing, and it deserves to be understood in full context rather than reduced to a headline. Clark had watched everything unfold from inside the locker room. The foul, the post-game comments, the public backlash, the revised story, the speech, the ongoing media conversation that was putting her head coach at the center of a national controversy. And when she spoke publicly about White during that period, she did not add to the criticism. She stood next to her coach's emotional experience, said she had spoken to White personally, and described the genuine difficulty of the position White had been put in by the outside noise surrounding the organization. She said she hated watching fans boo White before a game. She said it made her sick, honestly. She framed the broader controversy as an example of a culture that loves to divide rather than uplift, and she positioned her own relationship with her head coach as something strong and intact, regardless of what was being said externally. She even noted that there was no way the team was losing that game because she had told White before tip-off that they would win it for her. That response from Clark is significant on multiple levels simultaneously. Clark is the most prominent player in the WNBA right now. Her voice in any conversation carries institutional weight that goes beyond normal player commentary. When she speaks, every platform amplifies it. When she took White's side, or more precisely, when she humanized White's experience and pushed back on the severity of the public criticism, it created a genuinely complicated dynamic inside the Fever organization because it did not align cleanly with where Cunningham's perspective appeared to be. Cunningham had said the foul was intentional. She had needed her own coach's public acknowledgement of how bad the play was, and that acknowledgement arrived 3 days late only after sustained external pressure. From Cunningham's experiential position, the support from her coach had been insufficient in its timing and its framing at the moment it mattered most. Clark's public defense of White during the same period put a different, highly visible voice inside the locker room on a different side of the same internal question. That split between the player who got hurt and the organization's biggest star expressing genuine sympathy for the coach is the most honest window into the actual complexity of what was happening inside Indiana's locker room during one of the most publicly scrutinized weeks in the franchise's recent history. This was not a situation where the team presented a unified front with a clear shared perspective. This was a situation where different people with different relationships to the same events processed them in genuinely different ways and expressed those differences in public comments that did not point in the same direction. Coaches build real relationships with players over years, and those relationships create genuine loyalty that does not always align neatly with what outside observers think the institutional priority should be. Clark's relationship with White is clearly real and clearly matters to her. Cunningham's experience of the specific week in question is also real and clearly matters to her. Both things can be true at the same time, and the fact that they produce different public expressions from within the same locker room is the most honest reflection of how these situations actually work inside professional sports organizations when the pressure gets high enough. The complication for White is that a locker room split of this nature, even a quiet, partially visible one, is precisely the kind of internal dynamic that undermines a head coach's long-term authority. Players talk to each other. They observe how their teammates are treated in high-pressure moments. They form conclusions about whose back the coaching staff will have when it actually matters and whose experience will be subordinated to other considerations when difficult choices need to be made. A head coach can survive a bad press conference. Coaches recover from misstated things in front of cameras all the time. What is significantly harder to recover from is the perception, earned over a documented sequence of events, that the loyalty on offer from the coaching staff is conditional in ways that players on the receiving end of that condition are very much aware of. The voices calling for consequences went well beyond fan commentary on social media, and their reasoning went beyond the basketball specifics. Patrick Bet-David's assessment was direct and unambiguous. He described the sequence of events: confident defense on night 1, revised story on day 3, passionate speech about standing by players, and named it clearly as one of the most obvious demonstrations of poor leadership he had observed in recent sports coverage. His specific point was about accountability. Not the kind of accountability that shows up in a carefully worded statement released after the public pressure has already forced a revision. The kind that shows up in real time, on the night the thing happens, before the calculation about how much criticism is coming has been completed. Real accountability, he argued, does not require 3 days and a mounting public crisis to locate itself. It exists at the moment the question is first asked, not at the moment the consequences of the initial answer become impossible to absorb. Other analysts went further in examining the second layer of the story, the question of who approved White's revised statement before it went public. The suggestion that the Indiana Fever's PR team, and potentially the league office itself, reviewed the language of White's second press conference before she delivered it is not a fringe theory. League offices in professional sports regularly monitor and sometimes participate in the communication strategy around high-profile public controversies involving their franchises and personnel. The idea that a statement addressing a national conversation about player safety, coaching conduct, and racial commentary would go out without any organizational review is not a particularly credible assumption about how professional sports PR operates. If the league was involved in shaping or approving the language of that second statement, the implication is significant. It means the institutional response to this situation was managed at a level above the individual coaching staff, and that the careful framing of White's revised account, the logistics of the press conference timing, the emphasis on not having replay access, the pivot to defending her commitment to all of her players, reflects a calculated organizational communication strategy rather than a spontaneous personal accounting from a coach who genuinely changed her mind after watching the footage more carefully. The call for White to be fired came from multiple directions, including commentators who framed it specifically as an organizational failure rather than a personal one. The argument was not simply that she said the wrong thing at a press conference. The argument was that the full sequence, immediate defense of an opposing player over her own injured athlete, a revised story that contradicts broadcast footage, a passionate speech that positioned her as the aggrieved party in a situation where her own player was the one who got hurt, represents a pattern of decision-making that reflects poorly on the institutional values of an organization trying to present itself as a professional, well-governed franchise during the most commercially significant period in the league's history. Whether or not the job is actually in jeopardy depends on factors not visible from the outside: the owner's relationship with White, the internal assessment of how much of this damage is recoverable, and whether the broader season results provide enough organizational cover to weather the controversy. What is not in question is that the public accounting of her leadership through this specific week left a significant credibility deficit that a single emotional speech about standing by her players was not sufficient to close. The most telling critique may be the simplest one. White said with genuine passion and volume that she will always stand by her players. She said it at a podium, in front of cameras, with the emotional conviction of someone who absolutely means it in the moment they are saying it. The problem is that the player watching that speech from inside the Fever locker room, who needed her coach to stand by her in real time, on the night the foul happened, without waiting for 3 days of outside pressure to make the honest assessment arrive, that player had already experienced the version of the speech that did not have cameras pointed at it. What a head coach says at a podium matters. What they say in the first moment, before the calculation about backlash has been completed, matters more. And what they demonstrate through the sequence of their decisions when a difficult situation develops under genuine pressure. That is the version of leadership that players actually form their professional trust around, regardless of what the podium speech sounds like when the lights are on. What the full arc of Stephanie White's week reveals is not ultimately a story about one press conference or one poorly chosen set of words in a high-pressure moment. It is a story about what coaching loyalty actually looks like when it gets tested by a situation that puts two different relationships in direct conflict with each other. The three-stage collapse is documented clearly enough that it does not require interpretation to follow. Stage 1, confident, immediate defense of Carrington on the night of the foul, with specific personal characterization of her competitive style and a direct statement that she did not oppose the contact. Stage 2, revised account 3 days later claiming she had not seen the play develop in real time and only understood its severity after watching it on replay, an explanation that broadcast footage appears to directly contradict. Stage 3, passionate podium speech about standing by her players unconditionally, delivered in the context of a situation where the player who actually needed that unconditional support had been waiting 72 hours for it to arrive. The central irony of the entire sequence is the one that keeps pulling people back to the story even after the specific incidents have been processed and cataloged. She genuinely may believe that she stands by all of her players equally. She may have said it at that podium with complete sincerity and zero awareness of how the timeline she had just created made that claim land. Personal relationships built over years of shared professional experience create real, deep loyalties that operate faster than conscious decision-making in moments of sudden pressure. When the play happened, the instinct fired before the full accounting of who was on which bench in that specific moment had been completed. And by the time the accounting caught up, the public record had already been made. Sophie Cunningham deserved to have her coach call a dangerous play dangerous on the night it happened. Not because the relationship between White and Carrington is not real, not because coaches are required to have no loyalty to players they previously coached on other teams. But because Cunningham is also her player, sitting in the same locker room under the same organizational structure, with the same expectation that when something serious happens to her on a professional basketball court, the person whose job it is to lead and protect her roster will respond to her experience with the same immediate urgency that would apply to anyone else wearing that jersey. Until Stephanie White addresses that specific gap, not with another speech about unconditional support, but with a direct, honest accounting of why the timeline of her public response looked the way it did, and what she would do differently if the same situation arose again, this story will continue to resurface every time DiJonai Carrington generates another headline for the same reason. And based on the last week of evidence, the next headline is not going to take long to arrive. Tell us in the comments where you stand. Does Stephanie White survive this as Indiana's head coach? And what would genuine accountability from her actually look like at this point?